Imagine standing in the middle of the recent SME forum in Xi'an. The room is packed with Russian and Chinese dignitaries. Business deals are flying back and forth, but there is a ghost in the room, or rather the noticeable absence of one, the US dollar. For decades, the greenback was the universal language of trade. Yet, looking at the data Boris Titov just presented, you realize the language has completely changed. He dropped a figure that honestly makes you do a double take. 95%. That is the amount of trade between these two superpowers now settled entirely in their own currencies. The dollar, once the king of the room, has been effectively exiled. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just about cold, hard cash or avoiding sanctions. It feels like they're engineering a completely parallel reality. You look at the tourism projections, 3.5 million people crossing borders, visa restrictions vanishing, digital financial assets replacing traditional banks. It creates this vivid image of a massive, independent economic fortress being constructed brick by brick. While the West talks about pressure and isolation, looking at this new data, it seems Moscow and Beijing aren't just surviving the pressure. They are actively building a world where they simply don't need to care about it anymore.
That really, that perfectly captures the energy and I think the urgency of what's happening. You mentioned that 95% figure, and it's a headline grabber for sure.
It's hard to ignore.
It is. But what we're really witnessing, I think, is something much bigger than a trade metric. It's a sign of an incredible, an accelerated structural shift in the whole global financial landscape. We're moving from these theoretical discussions about de-dollarization.
Things people have been talking about for years.
Exactly, for years. And now we're seeing the actual implementation of durable alternative systems. So our mission today, I think, is to go far beyond those headlines.
Right, to get into the nuts and bolts.
Precisely. We are going to look at the foundational mechanics, the tangible technological blueprint, and the economic pillars that are holding all of this up. We really need to understand not just that this shift is happening, but how. How are they structurally pulling away from the U.S.-led system? And what does that actually mean for global financial power?
Let's do it. So we're diving into the architecture of exclusion, the construction of a world without the dollar.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's start with the hard numbers then, because that 95% figure Boris Titov mentioned, it's actually, believe it or not, the conservative number.
It is, yeah. When you dig into the official reports coming straight from the Russian government, from their top financial people, the picture becomes even starker.
How stark are we talking?
Well, Russian Finance Minister Anton Siluanov, he was speaking at a major Russia-China financial dialogue, and he confirmed it. He and the Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak, both said that 99.1% of all trade settlements between them.
99.1.
99.1% are now done entirely in rubles and yuan. Just think about the gravity of that number for a second.
It's basically a complete financial decoupling, at least in their bilateral trade. That isn't a policy change. That's a complete institutional divorce from the dollar.
It is. And practically, it means two immediate things. First, it severely limits the ability of Western financial institutions to even see what's happening.
To monitor the flows.
Exactly. If the transactions are settled entirely within their own systems, there's no need for an intermediary bank in New York or London. So it acts as this crucial shield against, financial scrutiny or espionage.
Now the second thing.
The second thing is that Moscow is being very explicit about this. They frame it as an instrument of national survival. It's a direct countermeasure to Western pressure.
So it's about mitigating risk.
It's all about mitigating risk. You reduce reliance on the dollar, you reduce reliance on external infrastructure, and you protect yourself from bank freezes, asset seizures, all the volatility that comes with trading in a currency you don't control. For them, it's about financial sovereignty above all else.
Which makes total sense, given Russia's immediate needs. But the real story here, the one that shows the speed, is in the markets themselves, specifically the Moscow exchange, the MOEX.
Yes. The rise of the Chinese yuan in Russia is it's the market's visceral, almost biological reaction to the geopolitical climate.
It's the most real-time indicator we have of this whole paradigm shift, right?
Absolutely. For decades, the yuan was, it was basically a rounding error in Russian finance, a totally marginal currency. And yet, in just 2 years, yuan-denominated trade on the MOXX just exploded.
What kind of numbers are we talking about? From basically zero?
From almost nothing to, by May 2024, accounting for 54% of all transactions on the exchange.
54%?
Yeah.
In 24 months?
That level of adoption, it demonstrates a massive organic market substitution. The market itself was choosing this path.
And then, of course, the inevitable happened. The U.S. Treasury decided to target the very heart of that market. They sanctioned the MOX itself in the summer of 2024.
Right.
How did the market even respond to that, to having its main trading venue directly attacked?
The reaction was instantaneous and completely conclusive. That substitution, which was already happening fast, it went into hyperspeed.
So the sanctions backfired.
In a way, yes. Post-sanctions on the MOX, the proportion of trades done in Chinese currency spiked again. It reached an overwhelming 99.8%.
Wow.
So the sanctions didn't stop the trade. They just cemented the yuan's role as the de facto, non-negotiable, primary foreign currency for the entire Russian economy. It was the final push into complete operational dependence.
That speed is just astonishing, and it explains why Russia went from, being a nobody on the global RMB usage map to suddenly becoming the fourth largest global center for Chinese currency trading.
At late 2022, yeah.
To put that in context for you, Russia literally leaped over these long-established financial hubs in terms of yuan trading volume in less than 2 years. It just shows the sheer size of the void that was left when Western currencies made a mass exit.
And that profound financial pivot, it's what's underpinning this massive and still growing trade relationship. You have to understand the scale here.
Right, because you need a reason to trade in these currencies.
Exactly. The bilateral trade hit a record of $240.11 billion in 2023. And that momentum, it hasn't slowed down at all. It just kept expanding into 2024, now getting close to $245 billion. This is the economic reality that needs a non-dollar payment system to function.
Okay, so let's break that trade down a little, because the composition of it really highlights this fundamental asymmetry in the relationship that we have to talk about.
Yes, it's a complementary relationship for sure, but one that absolutely defines Russia as the, let's say, junior partner.
How so?
It's entirely complementary, but it's also inherently unbalanced. Russia's exports are, well, they're heavily concentrated, almost singularly focused on energy.
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas. It makes up about 75% of everything Russia exports to China. And here's a critical detail. Those resources are often sold at a discount, a significant discount compared to global benchmark prices.
So Russia solidifies its role as the commodity supplier.
The discounted raw material supplier, yeah. They're providing the fuel for China's industrial engine.
And in return, China is providing all the essential high-end goods and technology that Russia needs to keep its economy running after the West left.
Precisely. China's filling that void. They're exporting crucial items, electronics, chemicals, consumer goods, all the things that used to come from Europe or America.
But the most visible change is in transportation, right? Cars.
It's the most visible transformation by far. We're talking about automobiles. China now provides something like 90% of Russia's imported new passenger vehicles.
90%. That is a complete market capture.
It is. If you walk down the streets of Moscow or St. Petersburg today, they're just dominated by Chinese brands, not German, not Japanese, not American. This trade dynamic really underscores an undeniable reality. Moscow has massively increased its dependency on Beijing to maintain its supply chains and to get access to modern critical tech.
So, okay, the economic foundation for de-dollarization is there. You've got massive, growing trade flows. They're settled overwhelmingly in local currencies, with Russia sending fuel and China sending back finished goods. The question now becomes, how do they secure this whole arrangement technologically? How do they build the plumbing?
And that takes us right into the infrastructure. If the first part was about, quantifying the shift, this part is about the permanent structural changes they're building to withstand any future pressure. And the key contrast here is strategic intent.
What do you mean?
Well, Russia is focused on sanctions adaptation, on defense. China, on the other hand, is executing what you can only describe as an offensive strategy of global financial expansion.
That distinction is so important. China isn't just building a defensive wall against sanctions. They're building a whole new railway line for the rest of the world to use.
You've hit the nail on the head. And the backbone of this new system was launched from their International Operations Center in Shanghai back in September 2025. There are 3 key platforms that make up the digital blueprint for this parallel economy.
Okay, what are they?
So first, you have the ECNY cross-border platform. It's called SBDC. This is the network that actually handles the movement of money. It's designed for secure global payments using the digital yuan.
And its main selling point is speed.
Speed and simplicity. It offers real-time, instantaneous settlements. It completely bypasses the multi-day delays and all the complex intermediaries of the traditional correspondent banking system.
So that's the payment layer. What about the technical architecture underneath it all?
That's the second pillar, the blockchain platform. Its role is highly technical, but it's crucial. It ensures interoperability.
So it lets different systems talk to each other.
Basically, yes. It provides these standardized gateways so that various national blockchain networks, maybe from BRICS countries or other partners, can all communicate and integrate with digital yuan payments. It's like the universal translator that makes sure everything speaks the same digital language.
Okay, and the third platform. This is where the ambition seems to go beyond just buying and selling goods. This is about challenging the dollar's role in global capital markets.
Exactly. The third one is the digital assets platform. This is designed for capital. It enables the issuance, the accounting, and the trading of digitized assets.
Things like bonds.
Bonds, bills, even new things like carbon credits. And the key is that all settlements are conducted directly in digital yuan. This shows the intent isn't just to buy oil or cars. It's to create an entire self-sufficient capital market infrastructure where assets are created, denominated, and traded completely outside the U.S. regulatory orbit.
And when you look at why other countries are getting interested in these platforms, it really just comes down to brutal business logic, speed and cost.
It's the undeniable technological advantage China is leveraging. The metrics are so compelling that they force commercial adoption no matter what your geopolitical alignment is.
So how fast is it?
This new system boasts transaction speeds of about 7 to 8 seconds. It's virtually instantaneous. Now, you contrast that with a traditional SWIFT payment, which can often take 3 to 5 days to clear because of all the different banks and jurisdictions it has to hop through.
You mentioned a specific case study in Southeast Asia that was pretty dramatic.
Yes, there was a joint project between China and Indonesia for cross-border payments. The very first payment they sent through this new digital system was reported to be 100 times faster than the old methods they were using.
100 times.
Think about what that means for a commodity trader. The risk reduction is immense. Your funds are no longer stuck in limbo for days on end.
And the cost savings are just as mind-blowing. I saw a figure of a 98% reduction. I mean, that's not just a marginal improvement. That's an existential threat to the old way of doing things.
It is. That metric is the core challenge to the existing order. Transaction costs are being slashed by staggering amounts, anywhere from 75% to 98%.
So who is seeing these savings?
Well, we've had reports from Middle Eastern energy traders connected to the system. They said they saw a 75% reduction in their settlement costs. And that 98% figure you mentioned, that came from a test between Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi. The payment fee to a supplier in the Middle East was almost entirely eliminated.
So when the old dollar-based system looks slow, cumbersome, and incredibly expensive by comparison,
it creates this massive pragmatic incentive for businesses to switch, regardless of where they are in the world.
Okay, so let's talk about the existing playing for a minute. We hear the terms CIPS and SWIFT thrown around, sometimes interchangeably, but they're fundamentally different things.
They are, and this is a point that really needs careful clarification. CIPS is not just China's version of SWIFT. It performs a different function. SWIFT is primarily a messaging system. It's like the post office. It sends the instruction from bank A to bank B saying a payment needs to happen. CIPS, on the other hand, is an RMB clearing and settlement mechanism. It's more like the US to GAE system for dollar transactions. It's the bank that actually holds and moves the money.
So SWIFT carries the note, CIPS moves the cash.
That's a great analogy. And here's the crucial detail. Historically, CIPS has often used SWIFT messaging to send those instructions internationally. So it relied on the SWIFT post office.
That's changing.
It's changing. It is rapidly growing into a very powerful alternative clearinghouse for all yuan-based transactions.
How big is that network now?
As of May 2025, CIPS had linked over 4,900 banking institutions in 187 different jurisdictions. And yes, by mid-2022, 23 Russian banks had already joined.
But it's still a Chinese system.
We have to be clear about that. It is purely RMB focused, and it remains squarely under Chinese regulatory supervision. So while it solves the clearing problem for the yuan, it keeps Beijing firmly in control of that network.
So if CIPS is the national system being stretched for global use, then mBridge sounds like the true flagship project for the future, the multilateral vision.
mBridge, or the multiple CBDC bridge, is where you really see China's vision for a global financial restructuring come into focus. This is a very sophisticated collaboration.
Who's involved?
It involves the digital currency institutes of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, the UAE, and it's being done in collaboration with the BIS Innovation Hub. And importantly, Saudi Arabia joined the project in 2024.
And what is Enbridge actually designed to do? And why is everyone calling it the ultimate tool for sanctions evasion?
Because it enables real-time, peer-to-peer, cross-border payments using national CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. But they're all built on a shared blockchain, the Enbridge ledger.
And that shared ledger cuts out the middlemen.
It cuts out all the intermediaries. And crucially, by creating a settlement layer completely outside the U.S. supervised financial system, Enbridge gives its participants a mechanism to evade U.S. financial sanctions entirely.
So the strategic goal is unambiguous. It's institutionalizing independence.
Absolutely. The technical capability is already there. China could, right now, conduct up to 38% of global trade in digital yuan, completely bypassing SWIFT and the traditional dollar choke points. This represents a kind of governance decoupling that, ironically, U.S. sanctions policy has accelerated.
So by weaponizing the dollar.
By weaponizing the dollar, the U.S. gave a huge incentive to actors like China and Russia to invest heavily in creating these durable alternative financial infrastructures. And Enbridge is the clearest sign of China's ambition to set new global standards and move a huge chunk of international finance onto a non-dollar rail. That's how they secure this new parallel reality.
We've laid out the huge scale and the offensive strategy of China's digital currency push. So now let's turn to Russia's side of this, the digital ruble, or DR.
Right.
Because the DR project, it seems to be driven much more by necessity and defense. It feels more internally focused, not like the global ambition we just saw with Enbridge.
That is the critical difference, yes. Russia's digital ruble is currently being piloted as a retail CBDC, and it's primarily focused on two things: adapting to sanctions and enhancing state control over domestic money circulation.
And it's still in early stages.
Very early. The phased rollout is scheduled to start from September 2026. Their early pilots, as of August 2025, have involved only about 100,000 transactions. It's a modest scale.
And that scale, 100,000 transactions, it's just completely dwarfed by what China has already achieved. It really hammers home how far Russia is lagging behind.
The comparison is very stark. I mean, China's digital yuan has been an aggressive pilot trial since 2019. The cumulative transaction value surged to around $250 billion by mid-2023.
250 billion versus 100,000 transactions.
It's a difference in magnitude of thousands of times. It just confirms that Russia's playing catch-up. They don't have the technological head start or the sheer economic scale that China has.
And this tech gap leads right to the core challenge in their partnership, doesn't it? How do the digital ruble and the digital yuan, two completely separate systems, actually talk to each other to handle those massive trade flows we discussed earlier?
It's a significant technical challenge. As they are currently designed, as retail CBDCs, they are likely incompatible.
So you can't just plug them together?
No, they weren't built with the same cryptographic standards or platform architecture. It's not like plugging in two different US cables. The expectation is that any collaboration will have to happen at the wholesale CBDC level, the versions used between central banks and large financial institutions.
And if they need to build a bridge, and China is so far ahead on the tech, that comes with a pretty big cost for Moscow, which is technological dependency.
That is the big geopolitical risk Moscow is running right now. There are talks underway for a platform interface pilot to connect the two currencies, but Beijing is firmly in the driver's seat. They are positioned to dictate the standards and the necessary infrastructure.
So you substitute one dependency, the dollar, for another, the yuan architecture.
And that's the acute risk. When you rely on another country's technology to facilitate your core trade and financial flow, you are, by definition, sacrificing a degree of economic sovereignty.
Now, to try and counter that vulnerability, Russia has been championing this multilateral effort under the BRICS banner. They're pushing for a BRICS bridge.
They're driving this very hard, yes. Russia is trying to lead the creation of this BRICS bridge, which would be a proposed platform for CBDC settlements. The goal is a truly sovereign system outside any Western regulatory reach.
Is it gaining traction?
Well, Finance Minister Silanov has emphasized how urgent it is, saying the technological gateways for these kinds of settlements are already operating. But for now, it's more of a geopolitical aspiration than a ready-to-deploy system. It has support among BRICS members, but it hasn't been formalized into a concrete funded work plan yet.
Okay, let's pivot for a second to the domestic side of this, because there are some big hurdles for the digital ruble at home. If Russia can't even get its own citizens to trust and use it, its utility is pretty limited.
It's a massive barrier. The public skepticism is deep. A poll from 2023 found that while most Russians had heard of the DR, only 30% expressed any desire to actually use it.
Why so low?
There are two main reasons for this profound lack of demand. First, its design actively discourages savings.
How?
Unlike a normal bank account, the digital ruble will not accrue any interest in the specialized digital wallets. It's designed purely as a means of payment. So it's like a hot potato. People want to spend it immediately rather than hold it, which is highly unattractive in an economy where people are worried about inflation.
And the second reason is much more political, right? It goes straight to fears about state control and surveillance.
This is the absolute crux of the issue. The system is designed to give the central bank unprecedented oversight and control over every single transaction. And crucially, to open one of these electronic wallets, users have to register through the Goslugi government platform.
And that platform has become toxic.
It's become toxic because the state has weaponized it.
Weaponized how?
It's the same platform that's now used to issue electronic conscription notices, or e-summons. So for the average citizen, the system links their access to mandatory government services, their entire financial life, and the state's power to mobilize them for war.
So you're connecting a new surveillance-enabled currency directly to mandatory military service.
And that connection dampens public enthusiasm far more effectively than any financial disincentive could. People don't see it as a convenience. They see it as a mechanism of tracking and control.
And that fear is compounded by this concept of colored money. We should probably clarify what that means because it really speaks to the deepest fears people have about state interference in their private economic lives.
Colored money refers to the technical ability to assign specific rules to digital rubles. So imagine you get a social payment, say, funds for child support. Those funds could be digitally marked or colored so they can only be spent on children's items and only at approved stores.
So the state could program the money to control not just who gets it, but what they can buy and when.
Exactly. It's a way for the state to micromanage economic flows. So instead of receiving a universal currency, you get something that's more like a voucher, but it's still technically a ruble, just one that's constrained by an algorithm.
Has the government said they'll do this?
The authorities have explicitly denied that digital rubles will have expiration dates or things like that. But the fear persists that the system could be used to direct spending towards politically sensitive areas like pensions or funds for the defense industry. The public sees it as a fundamental erosion of their financial freedom.
Which brings us back down to the ground level, moving away from the digital architecture and looking at how this new reality is affecting real people and real businesses.
Yeah.
You mentioned an anecdote about Alexei, a machinery importer in Moscow.
Yes, because for him, this whole de-dollarization thing is intensely personal. It's about pure economic survival. We try to humanize these big shifts because they aren't just numbers on a balance sheet. They are existential decisions for thousands of businesses.
And what was his problem?
Well, Alexei imports heavy machinery. Relying on Western banks meant he was living in a state of constant anxiety. His payments were regularly frozen or they bounced back because the corresponding banks were terrified of accidentally violating sanctions. His business was literally being suffocated by transactional risk.
The moment a transaction had to pass through New York, he lost all control over it.
Precisely. So for him, and for countless others like him, pivoting to the yuan system, even though it's still a bit clunky, as Boris Titov admitted, it's just pure pragmatism. It's a survival mechanism.
The back door.
It's a necessary, stable back door that bypasses New York and allows them to keep importing the parts they need to keep their businesses alive.
Now, this whole partnership is built on strategic alignment, mutual distrust of the West, a shared goal of a multipolar world. But when we look at major capital investment, we find this fascinating paradox.
An asymmetry, yeah. Driven by China's very pragmatic adherence to Western sanctions, believe it or not.
Which complicates the narrative of a unified front.
It really does. While trade is booming, major Chinese direct investment in Russia has largely stopped since 2022. It's basically ceased.
Why is that?
Because Chinese corporations, especially the big ones with the global exposure, or that rely on dollar-denominated supply chains, are absolutely terrified of triggering secondary sanctions from the U.S. Treasury.
So they're happy to trade huge volumes of goods, buy discounted oil, sell cars, but they will not put their long-term capital at risk inside Russia.
That is the cold, hard risk calculation they're making. We saw a perfect example of this with a massive gas processing plant project. It was being developed by Russia's Sear and China's Sinopec.
A huge project.
A $500 million investment. And it was frozen, just stopped, due to direct sanction concerns. Chinese state-linked firms are prioritizing their access to global markets and U.S. dollar liquidity over deepening long-term fixed investments in Russia.
But the investment isn't all one way. We are seeing Russian firms putting more money into China.
And that's the interesting counterflow. It actually reinforces that structural imbalance we talked about. Russian firms are actively embedding themselves deeper into the Chinese supply chain.
For example,
Ruzel, the aluminum giant, acquired a big stake in a Chinese aluminum manufacturer. Nornickel is planning a copper production joint venture that would literally transfer copper production capacity from Russia to China.
So Russian assets are moving towards the perceived security of Chinese markets.
Yes, it suggests a deepening integration, but a very asymmetric one. It reinforces Moscow's status as the junior partner, seeking security under Beijing's much larger economic umbrella.
And finally, let's talk about the most tangible human element that's cementing this whole alliance: tourism, cross-border social activity. This is where the structural change really hardens at the street level.
The statistics here are a great proxy for that cultural and economic integration. Thanks to the move toward visa-free travel and simpler entry rules, the number of Chinese tourists visiting Russia is projected to hit 3.5 million by 2025.
That's a huge increase.
It's a projected 30% jump. China has decisively become Russia's #1 source of foreign tourism. It's a massive, deliberate pivot away from the West.
And this brings us to Sergei, the shop owner in St. Petersburg. For him, the flow of commerce has literally shifted east, and he's had to completely adapt his daily operations just to survive.
Sergei's story is the perfect micro-example of this macro-level governance decoupling. His shop used to rely heavily on European and American tourists. After 2022, it went silent, a daily reminder of his city's new isolation.
And now?
Now, the influx of Chinese tourists, combined with his ability to accept direct Chinese QR code payments, WeChat Pay, Alipay, that's his financial lifeline. He doesn't need a Russian bank as an intermediary. He doesn't need a dollar clearance. He doesn't need a visa. He just needs to scan a code.
So this huge flow of people, all backed by these parallel payment systems, is what you called the social cement hardening the geopolitical alliance.
It is. It means the economic integration is no longer some abstract policy.
Yeah.
It's being internalized by ordinary people who now recognize that their financial survival depends entirely on this Eastern connection.
The local businesses, the supply chains, the whole flow of capital, it's all rotating east.
Exactly. The old dependencies are being replaced by new digital ones, and it's all driven by sheer pragmatic necessity.
This deep dive has really shown us that this de-dollarization push it's less about ideological posturing and so much more about the deliberate, large-scale construction of a sophisticated parallel economic reality. They are not waiting for the world to change. They are actively building the change themselves, brick by technological brick.
And that is the crucial takeaway for understanding global governance today. The widespread aggressive use of U.S. financial sanctions has accelerated what we can call governance decoupling. It has forced sanctioned actors and their partners who see the dollar system as weaponized to invest massive resources into building durable alternative infrastructures like CBDCs, CIPS, and Enbridge. The structural shift is creating a future where two competing, or at least overlapping but distinct financial architectures will coexist. The long-term implication is that the very tools intended to project and maintain U.S. influence, the centrality of the dollar, are instead catalyzing institutional separation. They are forcing the global economic stage to fundamentally rotate. This fragmentation of the global financial system is durable, it is intentional, and it is accelerating.